the symbolism of this book is so rich. Dracula resides in the basement. He doesn't reside in what Jonathan thought was his bedroom. He goes down and resides in the basement. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where your inner Dracula, your inner parasite resides. It resides in your subconscious mind below the level of your conscious awareness. Your body is constantly talking to you. There are constantly visual images flashing through your mind. There are constantly feelings that are coming up inside of you, but you don't see it. And they just simply pop into your mind. And because you are, and we are, blind to that, you simply have this thought pop into your mind and you think it's your own conscious thought. It's simply a reaction. This is really important that you dig down to this level and see this for yourself. People can go to spiritual things. You can do it for 20. Well, you can always start fresh today, even if you've wasted 20 years.
Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it fits right here because, again, we've got so much ground to cover and we're not even out of the castle yet. But, again, so many great insights in the castle. But eventually...
Tom, we can't forget to talk about the ladies.
Oh, you're right. Those 3 vampire ladies that are in the castle. How in the world could I overlook that?
I know. I think I dated all 3 of them at one time.
Well, I tell you, there's some real powerful symbolism. You got to say that he has woven the sexual symbolism in there, quite powerfully, along with the major theme that's throughout the book about how evil is alluring. That there's a fascination with it.
And the sexual thing is there because it's been suggested over the centuries many times that all of sleep is directly linked to the wrong use of sex energy. So it's going to be there.
Yes. Because the novel's so complete, of course, that would be there. Harker, at one point, he writes that he was in his journal that he was.
But remember, he was first forewarned by Dracula, who wanted to protect his source until the time came he was no longer necessary. So remember that the cleverness of Dracula, who understood his castle, his territory, wanted to make sure that Jonathan stayed healthy until he was no longer necessary. And so he very carefully and strenuously warned Jonathan not to wander around the castle at night and not to fall asleep in any of the other rooms.
Right.
Which, of course, like we all do, Jonathan promptly disobeyed and went out and did it anyway.
And he fell asleep.
To sum it up, and I encourage, again, everybody to go and read it for yourself, but just to make a quick summary, he falls asleep and he describes how he wakes up almost as if he's in some sort of a trance state. And there are these 3 ladies that are all around him, looking at him as they're vampiresses, I guess, looking at him as their tasty meal, and they're seducing him. And he has a very good, lucid description of how his own body, his own self is almost leaping forward. And I can only say that this is a perfect description of what this thing's psychological sleep really is. It actually does have a physical, neurological, chemical place in our brain.
Yeah.
That we actually, when we fall asleep, we're actually seduced, and it actually feels good to dream. It actually feels good to drift off into the sleep, and it does connect with the pleasure receptors of our brain, that there is a physical element to this, a chemical element to the sleep. And the description here of him falling asleep and falling under this spell is probably, from the emotional point of view, probably as good as you're ever going to get. And we're going to have to suffer through a certain type of withdrawal symptoms because the mechanicalness knows how to tap into the pleasure receptors of our brain, and we're going to have to withdraw from this to refuse to go along with, even if it's that thing that we know is wrong, we still do it, and we do it simply because it feels good to us, to our brain. It feels good because it's tapping into these pleasure receptors. But this is how the sleep works and why there's a physical discomfort for perhaps quite some time.
There's some great connections on the sea voyage, Fred, where he got it, all the storms and the mist. The ship gets shipwrecked up onto London shores, and they observers saw a great big dog, leap off the boat.
That's another really important point, that Dracula has the ability, under certain restrictions, and this is important too, to change his form. He can change himself into a bird and fly away. He can change himself into a dog, into an animal, into a beast. He has the ability to change himself, and this is our mechanicalness. This is important to remember. Will change itself. It's not going to stay totally fixed so you can easily spot it. It'll change itself to one day to be the humble saint, the next day maybe to be the sinner, whatever.
It was very nice to have this input from David in England.
There's one part I read this morning, which is in actually it's the end of chapter 2, I think it is, when Harker cuts himself shaving, got a very small mirror he's carrying around himself, cuts himself shaving unconsciously. Dracula sees the blood trickling down he goes to grab his throat, and then I think Harker then makes Dracula touch the beads of this rosary which he's been given, and then suddenly Dracula, he changes so quickly back to a nice guy that Harker even doubts that he was angry in the first place. I found that really amusing when I read that.
Thank you, David, for reminding us about the vital mirrors.
Yes, and it shows the symbolism here that, in essence, that the Dracula doesn't really exist. It's just like
what a great connection.
Our mind, we're talking about Dracula as being our inner tormentor, our inner mechanicalness, the inner force that keeps us away from the kingdom. But all of that is really just a hoax. There is nothing inside of you except for the own wrong conditioning in your own mind that actually prevents you from evolving, from growing, from developing. And all of that is just an illusion.
So important. Now, Dracula leaves the castle, right? The gypsies come and get him. And at this point, we've got Dracula on that boat headed over to the shores of London. So while he's on his journey, we'll, of course, pick the story back up there when he lands. But while he's on that journey at sea, let's take a moment to review some of these major themes in the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now, garlic is known to be a cleansing agent. It has a potent smell and it startles, okay? So garlic when you smell pure garlic, there's like a startle of awareness that's suddenly there because the smell is so potent.
Actually, as the best I understand it, is that the smell somebody gets when they eat garlic isn't from the garlic. It's from the garlic, which acts as a purifier, pushing the impurities out of the body that radiates out. So the smell is actually the impurities leaving the body. So those impurities leaving and radiating away would throw away Dracula because he doesn't want to be around impurities exiting.
And how can you discuss symbols and not get right to the symbol of the cross? And of course, Dracula withdraws at the sign of the cross. And of course, that's symbolic of that the higher has authority over the lower, and that there's not a thing that Dracula can do about it. And inwardly, we have this authority, Fred, but it's asleep. We've been asleep to who we really are.
I think that also relates to two other symbols used throughout the novel, which is Dracula only functions at nighttime and under the cover of darkness, doesn't want to have the light, which light consciousness, the cross, and also water. Dracula cannot cross water by himself.
Because
he has to be carried across by somebody else because he can't, water being life, he can't cross, he has nothing and is unable to cross life on his own.
Right. So the symbolism of the night and the day, I noted in the novel Dracula this sentence, his powers cease, as does that of all evil things at the coming of the day. Isn't that a beautiful sentence?